So, today we're talking about how life is a battle, and I always appreciate how Belva chooses great songs for us that relate to the sermon title and the sermon content. A Mighty Fortress, and what was that first? The Battle Belongs to the Lord. Yeah, this is great. Many of us call ourselves spiritual in the sense that we perceive the existence of something supernatural in the world, right? And even in ourselves. But are we good at perceiving spiritual battles, spiritual warfare that goes on all around us? You may believe you have no enemies in this world. I don't know. But, in fact, you do. The biblical book of Daniel lifts the veil on this conflict, and it gives us very good news. We'll be going through Daniel chapter 10 through 12 today. This is Daniel's final vision, and so this will be the end of this sermon series. Let's just reestablish where we are in history here. Remember that shortly after establishing control in Babylon, the new ruler, Cyrus, issued an edict that allowed the Jews to go back home to Israel to rebuild their temple. Now, Cyrus wasn't exactly interested in the Jews per se. He wanted to promote the goodwill of all of the people that he had in captivity. And so he wanted their prayers. He believed that they would be better subjects if they could live in their own homelands and worship their own gods in their own temples. The Jews thought this was wonderful. This is an answer to all their prayers, a fulfillment of prophecy. But then they found that the glorious restoration that they had been promised by the prophets didn't unfold quite like they expected. There was no king like David on the throne. After they rebuilt the temple's foundation, it seemed small and disappointing to the people who remembered Solomon's temple. There was opposition and danger in the land, so they didn't really have real peace. At best, they were living in partial fulfillment of this grand prophetic promise of return. Daniel knew this even though he hadn't left Babylon. And we'll see in the very first verse of this that it refers to his Babylonian name again, Belteshazzar, which we haven't heard in several chapters. It's a reminder that Daniel and his people were not yet truly free. So let's begin. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river of the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Before receiving his vision, Daniel was fasting and mourning and praying. And although we don't know what made Daniel decide to fast, it may have been that he was mourning on behalf of the Jews who had gone home, and perhaps he was seeking to understand God's purpose and plan in all these unfulfilled promises. Daniel's earlier visions, you may recall, had revealed that his people's problems would continue beyond the exile. So his anxiety could indicate his desire to understand more about this chaotic future that he'd been shown. Suddenly, this man appears before him, a figure that Daniel describes in language similar to that of Ezekiel in his visions of God by the Kibar River. Let's go on. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, "Daniel, You who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you and stand up, for I have now been sent to you." And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. Then he continued, "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard. And I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come." Now, Daniel's description and his response to this vision would make you think that God himself in human form was speaking to Daniel. Remember how Paul, when he was Saul, was struck down like this on the road to Damascus, and when he had a vision of Jesus, and just like Daniel, the people with him were terrified, but they didn't see or hear what Saul saw? Could this really be God? But we also have to wonder, what power could resist God for 21 days, as this prince of the Persian kingdom apparently had done? And we do recall that Jacob wrestled with God all night, but 3 weeks? That's something. And would God be sent to Daniel? This vision said he was sent. And would he somehow need Michael the archangel's help? What we can say is that we know that God did assign territories, geographical places, to spiritual beings after the Tower of Babel. That's who this prince of the Persian kingdom is. It's a power, it's a supernatural power. It's not a literal prince, it's a principality, is what Paul calls it in the New Testament. And God kept Israel for himself. The purpose of this message was to explain what would happen to Daniel's people in a time yet to come. This angelic or divine being will be describing a great turning point in Israel's history, as well as what would happen at the end of time. But I'm not going to read the whole chapter, prophecy in chapter 11. Let's just say it's an extraordinarily detailed description of what is now history. And you can read it yourself. It concerned the Jews from the 4th to the 2nd century BC. And we talked about this. It includes what we already talked about with Antiochus Epiphanes, remember him? That ends with the story of the cleansing of the temple that's still celebrated today during Hanukkah every year. This is the same prophecy, only it's much more detailed about which king does what when. And several generations of northern and southern kingdoms attacked each other, and Israel was right in between them, caught in the middle. North and south, of course, were from Israel's standpoint. But Israel wasn't just in the crossfire. Increasingly, they became in the crosshairs, and by the end, Israel was the target. And that would certainly be consistent with Satan's intent, and it was completely consistent with the historical details that we know, up to a point. But then things take a turn, and the details don't seem to correspond to that bad guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, that we talked about. So skipping down into chapter 11, he's described as, "The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors, or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people, and will distribute the land at a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land. That's Israel. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasuries of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans and the Cushites in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. That's a lot of detail, and believe me, the verses before that are even more so. Although we can't see clearly that a new character is being introduced in that first verse, the king, the fact is that the details do not fit Antiochus IV. And that has suggested to many Christian interpreters that Daniel is seeing a vision, or hearing about a vision of the Antichrist, who was predicted by St. John in the book of Revelation as this king. And we'll see even more evidence of that later in chapter 12. Plus, throughout this chapter, the kings are always the king of the north and the king of the south, never simply the king. So now it looks like it's three characters engaged in battle: the king of the south, the king of the north, and him, this king of verse 36. So this seems to be another example of the merging of near and far prophecies. And only after the near events have taken place can we see what passages apply to the far events. The king is Antiochus in a sense, but the king is also something more and something worse after that. The end is in the 2nd century BC, but the end is also in our future. This means this revelation tells us that present trends will continue to get worse until there's a final resolution. These verses stand between us, the historical present, and the end of history. Now, chapter 12 brings this vision to a close. The spiritual being goes on. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So, we learn that Michael will arise at this time of unprecedented distress. This is a reminder that Daniel's vision goes beyond mere earthly events. It is a cosmic battle. It's a story of good versus evil in the spiritual realm that ends with the deliverance of God's people. Now, Michael was a warring angel, the patron angel of Israel. Michael fights in order to protect God's people. And this end time, comes at a time of unprecedented distress. But the distress is no sooner announced than deliverance is introduced. And this deliverance is, stunningly, by resurrection. Did you know that the Jews didn't really necessarily believe in resurrection in the Old Testament times? Even in Jesus' time, it was a point of real contention. The Pharisees believed in resurrection. The other religious party, the Sadducees, did not. And they would come to blows sometimes over this difference. Of course, we can't come to a whole doctrine of afterlife based on this one verse, but we can confidently say that the righteous are destined for reward, and there will be punishment for the wicked after death, after resurrection. And we believe those wicked are those who work against the purposes and the people of God. And because we now have the New Testament, we know that the hope of resurrection and everlasting life are available to us because of the completed work of Jesus Christ. Because Jesus came and suffered and died and was buried, rose again, and ascended into heaven, we have hope. Because he came and suffered, we have a great high priest who knows what we're going through. He can intercede for us throughout this life. Because he died and was buried, we can be sure that these supernatural enemy powers have already been vanquished. Because he rose again, we can know that we too will rise. Because he ascended, we know that we live in God's kingdom here on earth, where a new order is at work. We are fighting the battle as an underground resistance. Sounds romantic, doesn't it? To the principalities and the powers of sin and death. If all this weren't true, as Paul says, we would be the most miserable of people, trusting in empty promises. But because all of it is true, our joy and our hope is unlimited. Let me reiterate that these chapters in Daniel's vision challenge us in many ways. As I've said before, biblical prophecy is hard. And this one is rooted in a complex history that we basically are unaware of. We don't remember Antiochus Epiphanes. We don't know it, and it's difficult to interpret it. It's obviously bigger than its historical setting, and yet it's not always clear which parts have happened and which haven't, what might be repeated and what might not. There's some comfort in remembering that Daniel himself was very confused, and that seemed to be okay with his heavenly visitors. So when we talk about spiritual battles, we have to remember that Jesus put away human weapons of violence and commanded his followers to do the same. He rebuked Peter for using a sword to attempt to prevent his arrest. In fact, he says, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" And Paul used military language when he talked about Jesus' death. We're definitely in a spiritual battle. On the cross, Paul says that Jesus, quote, disarmed the powers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. And in Ephesians, Paul quotes an Old Testament warrior hymn to the effect that the ascension of Jesus was in fact leading a victory parade to heaven. Jesus has indeed completed and won the great conflict. Paul, of course, also references this cosmic battle by telling us to put on the full armor of God, because our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Now, Daniel got a peek behind the curtain with this information about this cosmic spiritual battle, and we don't normally get to see this supernatural conflict, apart from what we read in Daniel and in Revelation. We pray about what we do see and trust that, however, our concerns intersect with what's happening behind that cosmic curtain, God will sort it out. So let's go back to chapter 12. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on the bank of the river and the other on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, "It will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has finally been broken, all things will be completed." I heard, but I did not understand, so I asked my Lord, "What will the outcome of all this be?" Daniel again finds himself in the position of eavesdropping on a conversation between angels. And one of the angels on the bank addresses a great concern to the other one, the one hovering over the water, saying, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" Isn't that what we all want to know? How long? Before answering, this one dressed in linen lifts both hands toward heaven and swears by him who lives forever. And in Deuteronomy 32:40, we see God lifting one hand to heaven and swearing by himself who lives forever. Using both hands, I assume, is for emphasis, right? It certainly suggests a solemn atmosphere around this occasion. This person then says something that reminds us of the answer given in chapter 7. He says, "It will be a time, times, and half a time." And we saw there that the reason he said it that way was not to give a precise time period, but rather to indicate that just as the wickedness seems to be gaining momentum, it will be stopped. It will happen in a time of great distress, since it will be at the moment the power of the holy people has finally been broken. Remember how distressed Daniel was during his previous vision when the holy people were losing the battle to the little horn? Here it is again. Deliverance comes at the most unlikely time. God seems to work that way. When human resources run out, God steps in to demonstrate his power. The point is that deliverance comes quickly and at the last possible moment. It reminds me of all those movie and TV shows where the hero has to disarm a nuclear weapon or a doomsday device, and the clock is running down, and you go, there's no time, but he never loses hope, does he? Like Daniel, like us, wants more information, so he asks, "My Lord, what will be the outcome of this?" And he replied, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." The reply is clear that now is not the time, and that when the time comes, the wise will understand. This celestial being tells Daniel, get on with your life. Go on and live your life. The wicked will continue to be wicked and not understand, while those who are wise will understand God's purposes. That's the clear part. Then there are still more puzzles. In verses 11 and 12, 2 more time periods are specified. Both are impossible to pinpoint with real events or even to correlate with each other. What is the relationship of 1,290 days to 1,335 days? And remember the 2,300 evenings and mornings in Daniel 7, and the times, and half a time in both chapters 7 and this one. Only God knows, and that seems to be the point. God knows that there is an end that he has determined, but we can't figure it out because we're not supposed to. Leave it to God, the angel says to Daniel, and through him he speaks to us. He says, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. Like that movie star hero, we're not supposed to give up hope, even when the goal seems impossible. I think this is the perfect conclusion for Daniel, for the book of Daniel, and for us. God is saying, you may suffer now, but I have given you a glimpse of the coming glory. God will set things right. Your reward is coming. But for now, live your life. By these words, God gives Daniel and all of us the confidence to persist, even during persecution and trouble. We have seen these themes from the beginning of this book. Daniel and his 3 friends went through all these difficult times, and then they were raised higher and higher in glory afterward, while their enemies were often humiliated or even died. We've seen that in each of the previous visions of Daniel, that the wicked appear to triumph only to end up being destroyed themselves. In the chapter I didn't read today, events unfold as this pointless cycle of invasions and battles and schemes and frustration, and Persia falls to Greece, and the great kingdom of Alexander is broken up and parceled out toward the 4 winds of heaven, and their successors will fall as well, as including Antiochus Epiphanes and the greater evil force that we know of as the Antichrist. What's more, we learn that the rewards and punishment for faithfulness and rebellion go beyond death itself. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. The good news is that God is no less in control today than he was in Daniel's time. To hear some modern Christians talk, we might not believe this is the case. Many preachers, many folks in the pews are a little panicky right now. They tell us that things have gotten out of control, like in our government or among people in the street and cartels. And if we don't act immediately, often by sending in a check, our whole society will be turned over to the devil. Well, yes, things will get worse before God comes to deliver us. And yes, God does expect us to work for righteousness' sake, but we don't need to be afraid. God is in control. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. We see in the New Testament what we saw in the Old. While it looks as if life is going to hell, God is working behind the scenes to bring about good, often more than good. He accomplishes his people's rescue and their salvation. In 6th century Babylon, it looked to the godly as if Babylon and then Persia were in control, but they weren't. In 2nd century BC Jerusalem, it looked as if Antiochus Epiphanes was in control, but he wasn't. In 1st century AD, of Jesus and Paul, it looked as if Rome was in control, but Rome was not. To Christians living 2,000 years after Jesus, it may look as if Satan is in control, but he isn't. God is in control. And because of that, we can have all kinds of joy and optimism in the midst of our struggles. And we do have struggles. I'm not overlooking that. Those struggles may be political or cultural. They may be emotional or physical or psychological or relational. But whatever the struggle, whatever the opposition, the oppression, God is in control. And in spite of present appearances, he will bring victory over evil and honor to those who remain faithful to him. The book of Daniel is a call to all God's people to remain steadfast in their love and obedience to him in spite of the present turmoil. Go your way, live your life, and persevere until the end, and then be raised to new life. Amen.
Amen.